France's new prime minister is tackling the country's budget with a proposal for a new tax targeting individuals with annual incomes of 250,000 euros or more. He also wants to crack down on the super wealthy's use of holding companies as a piggy bank. This comes as French politicians are currently in a deadlock over the budget. There is no governing majority party, and the new Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, only stands a chance at surviving if he convinces opposition parties not to vote against him in a no-confidence vote. He needs their support to get a budget passed, but the different parties have differing opinions on how best to do just that. That's tripped up previous prime ministers. Lecornu is France's fifth in just 2 years. Shirley Sitbon has more.
Remaining in power is a first task for France's prime minister and not an easy one. Sébastien Lecornu's party has no majority. Potential partners have conflicting demands, and the far left has already set a first no-confidence vote against him. On Friday, he made a pledge to no longer bypass Parliament to pass unpopular laws.
There is a functioning parliament which has been elected more than 1 year ago and which represents society with all of its divisions. We therefore cannot bypass lawmakers.
Opposition parties said they appreciated the move, but that the prime minister had to go much further to convince them not to topple him.
It's his general policy speech at Parliament that will show us if he's truly breaking away from previous policies. If the National Rally doesn't see a break, it will vote against him.
At the heart of the far right's demands, a serious curb on immigration and EU spending. Meanwhile, their socialist rivals demand, for starters, that no deal be made with the National Rally. They also want Lecornu to review laws already passed by previous governments without Parliament's approval.
Regarding the pensions reform, will MPs and senators be able to vote at last by December?
The socialists demand tax hikes for the wealthiest, which is a red line for conservatives. Lecornu said he will search for compromises on each issue. The man who some have described as a skilled negotiator will have to live up to this reputation.
Merci.
For more on France's budget woes, we can bring in Renaud Foucard, senior lecturer in economics at Lancaster University's Management School. Renaud, thanks so much for joining the program today.
Hello, good afternoon.
So critics are saying that France's deficit is out of control. Borrowing costs are rising, and as we see there, Parliament can't muster a majority to tackle the spending issue. This is the backdrop of the PM has been meeting with all the parties on Friday for talks. What's the response been to those meetings, and have we seen any tension coming out of them?
There are a lot of tensions at the moment, but it's absolutely crazy to me that there are still tensions, given that Lecornu seems to be very happy to kick the can down the road of the actual problems of France. So both Bayrou and Barnier fell because they tried to tackle the deficit, and they tried to tackle the deficit by touching the people you cannot touch in France, which is the pensioners. So Lecornu has started by saying, I will postpone that for 2027. I will just try to make a deal with the right and the Social Democrats. And in theory, it's relatively easy. To the Social Democrats, you need to give them some taxation of the wealthy, and what he already gave them, which is a promise to follow parliamentary tradition and not to impose the views of the government. To the right, he needs to give a bit on immigration, security, and things like that. Even that, at the moment, they're bargaining very, very tough, so I'm not even sure he will manage that. But the big problem is very happy to postpone them at the moment.
Now, it's interesting you bring up the Socialist Party there. They've been pressing, they want the rollback of the retirement age, 64 back to 62. They're eager for this wealth tax, the Zuckman tax, both things Lecornu has said that he's not interested in. He's since proposed a tax, a new tax, not a lot of details, on earners of 250,000 euros or higher, and maybe also cracking down on loopholes. Is that going to be enough to gain their support? And is that enough for the Conservatives?
At the moment, those parties that are lining up for 2027, and when you look at the Social Democrats, they are doing pretty well in the polls. So it seems that their strategy of trying to extract concessions has been relatively well perceived by the opposition, and they will be by the voters, sorry, and they will be worried to be seen as being too close to Macron. So is it going to be enough to have an abstention of the Social Democrats? I would think most likely yes. And is it going to be enough to get an abstention of Les Républicains? I would say also most likely yes, because they're still a tiny group in parliament. They don't represent a lot in terms of votes. If you look at the polls right now, they are basically on way to oblivion in terms of national politics, but they are absolutely in position of power right now because they are necessary for the coalition. So I think as long as they can keep their big ministries, as long as they can keep, in particular, the interior ministry, so try to keep tough on security and hope that in the event that Bardella collapses because he's young and not very good in debating, they will be in position for 2027. So I think they are jockeying for position for 2027. There is a very clear path for Lecornu to succeed. And if you look at what he's suggesting in terms of taxing the people who have very high income, and also so this idea of not allowing people with a holding to use it for their own spending, this is roughly what the Social Democrats have been asking for in a different form. So it shouldn't be a massive issue. And the socialists can still say, if you vote for us in 2027, you're going to get the real segment tax, which is a reason to vote for them in the end.
And I want to step back for a minute since we are talking about deficits. France last balanced its budget in 1973, so it's been running deficits for decades. Hasn't really appeared to be an issue, though, until the pandemic, because France had pretty solid growth. Last year, the deficit was at 5.8%, and the EU sets a cap of 3%. So in this situation, how is France comparing to other EU countries?
At the moment, there is it's a relatively bad moment, but a little bit better than a year or two to have deficit. So deficit, the problem is not to have a balanced budget, is the risk that they explode. And France has generally been doing relatively okay with that, not borrowing too much when it was dangerous to do so. The risk right now is that it goes very slowly for France. The previous debt has been taken at low interest rates, meaning that it doesn't explode right now. But the new debt that is taken today, in the next year, is going to be more and more expensive, also as financial markets are a little bit scared that France is less likely to repay than in the past. Is France an outlier? I think in Europe, France has been, in general, a relatively bad citizen, but not terrible. At the moment, France is starting to become an outlier, also because we have higher deficit in France, but also a higher cost of debt. And this solidarity in Europe is the fact that thanks to the European Central Bank, everyone is paying a relatively low interest in debt. But if you have big countries like France who start to slowly be a bit less reliable, the risk is that other European countries may also have to pay a little bit more on their debt. And so that's why I think there will be a moment, not today, but maybe next year, in 2 years, where the Europeans, the partners, if not the European Commission, the other big European countries, will start to be a little bit more pushy with France and ask them to do something more on the deficits.
Now, as you were mentioning there, this uncertainty does push up borrowing costs for the government. So in that situation that you were just outlining, how does France avoid that sort of death spiral where investor doubts push up borrowing costs higher and higher borrowing costs increase the deficit and et cetera, that happened to Greece. It also threatened Italy. Is France next, or is that just a worst case scenario?
No, it's a worst case scenario in the sense that since the debt crisis, there has been this commitment of the European Central Bank, so whatever it takes, said by Mario Draghi at the time, to say, we are going to save European economies from spiraling debt, which is great news because at the moment, France is doing bad in terms of deficit, but we are still paying a relatively low price for the debt. It's still below 4%. At the time of the debt crisis, we're talking about 12, 14%. No? So it's still very well contained. But this is only working because there is a solidarity between a large group of reliable countries. And so the risk is that not France becomes in a spiraling debt, but the entire Eurozone. And so this is far from happening right now, but definitely Germany, Italy, Spain, nobody wants to be taken in a downward spiral because France would become crazy things.
Renaud, thank you so much for joining us and giving your expertise. That's Renaud Foucault, Senior Lecturer in Economics at Lancaster University's Management School. Moving on to some other news, the Singapore-based discount fashion brand Shein has announced it will open a series of stores here in the French capital. The company, which started in China, has come under criticism for its business model and environmental record. Monty Francis tells us more.
It's here at this iconic BHV department store in Paris where the brand Shein is slated to sell its discount clothing. The Singapore-based brand is also planning to set up shop in several other French cities where the announcement is already causing a stir.
Moi qui viens souvent quand même aux galeries, c'est vrai que je trouve que ça laisse une très très mauvaise image. Je peux être curieuse, je peux aller voir et voir la qualité, comparer.
Moi je trouve ça assez pratique parce qu'on aura l'occasion du coup de pouvoir essayer et voir vraiment ce qu'on en pense.
The move is a strategic shift for the discount brand, which until now sold exclusively online. The spokesperson for the company, which has 25 million French customers, says having physical stores will be positive for the French economy.
Ce partenariat va permettre la création de 200 emplois au sein de la Société des grands magasins. Le but de ce partenariat, encore une fois, c'est de montrer qu'un modèle 100% en ligne peut fonctionner sur le physique.
But critics are outraged by the potential impact on already struggling textile companies.
Le BHV a eu le cynisme de dire qu'il y aurait 200 emplois de développés. 200 emplois de développés versus 15 000 emplois qui ont été déjà détruits ces 2 dernières années. Là, le BHV se vend ce qu'il y a de pire, seulement pour le pognon.
In addition to the stores, Shein is also planning to sell its clothes at booths and fairs across France. And it's also signed a controversial deal with the French label Piggy to sell its clothing online in 160 countries. Shein is targeting the French market because France is its largest customer in Europe. In fact, in terms of volume, Shein is the largest seller of clothes in France.
We'll be back with more news after a quick break.